Hello there and welcome to another Partners in Crime tutorial. In this tutorial you'll learn how to make a HUD or heads-up display with Blender. So we're first going to create some basic shapes, then we're going to use modifiers to alter the basic shapes positions, then we're going to jump into the compositor to add some glow effects, and afterwards we'll animate our elements. So let's get started. The first thing you want to do is delete the default cube and clean up your scene. So type X on your keyboard and click delete, and type numpad 7 on your keyboard to go into top view, and type Control Alt and the numpad 0 to bring your camera into your view. So now we're going to eliminate this background grid here from our view. So let's type in and let's scroll through here until we see the display section. Select the display section and you just want to uncheck all these values here. So outline selected, relationship lines, grid floor, and we'll click the X and Y tabs there to get rid of the horizontal and vertical lines. And we'll delete this lamp by right clicking on it, and we'll type X and click delete. And now we have a clear scene. So we can collapse this panel to the side here by typing N on our keyboard. And now that we have our scene cleared up, we can now add in our first HUD element. So to create our element, we're going to first start off with creating a radial dial shape. And to do that, we're going to add a curve. So go into the Create tab, and we're going to add a curved circle. So select that, and the circle will be added. And now we're going to add in a plane, and we're going to array it and curve it to our circle. So let's click plane to add a plane, size it down by typing S and moving cursor in, and left clicking. We're just going to be creating these thin little notches, so let's just type S, X, and just make this a little bit thinner. Move your cursor in, and left click. So now we're going to curve this around our circle, and then we're going to array it. So let's go into the modifier section, and click Add Modifier. And we'll actually add in an array modifier first. Uncheck the relative offset, and check the constant offset, and we'll put the constant offset value to 27.41 and type enter. And we're going to change the count to 32. So now we've created these notches. What we're going to do now is curve them around the circle. So let's click Add Modifier Curve and just click this object picker and select the Bezier circle. And now we have them curved. So let's right click on our plane and make sure we have it selected. Type S and just scale it down until you see some pretty even spacing. And left click. And that looks pretty good. So we can type SY, move our cursor in, scale that in, and left click. We can actually type, let's see, let's go to zoom in. Alright, we can type Shift D now, but before we do that, let's actually add in the material so we don't have to keep duplicating materials over. So let's go into the material section and add a new material and click shadeless. And now we have a shadeless white material for our notches, but let's make it blue. And let's make the material name HUD element. Alright, and let's go into material view so we can more accurately see that blue color. Alright, so now we can duplicate this, and we're just going to create smaller notches in between these large notches here. So we're going to Shift D, right click, and we're going to go into the modifier section and change the array modifier values. So since we're going to make these notches smaller, we're going to need a couple more notches. So let's go with 154 for the count, and let's type S and just size that in until we get some pretty nice scaling. So S and just move your cursor until you see some nice even spacing of these notches, and left click. Let's actually size this up a bit more. So let's type S, move that up so we can see that better. Left click, and we'll type SX, size that up, and left click, and we'll type SY, make them a little bit more square notches, and left click. Alright, so now we'll type S again, and size the notches until we get some even spacing. So left click there, scroll up to zoom in so you can see better, Alright, so that's looking pretty nice. So we've got our smaller notches in between our larger notches, and what we'll do now is we'll right click on the bezier circle we're curving everything to, and make sure the preview resolution is pretty high so that we get a nice smooth radial effect, so that we smoothed our circle out there. So we have our basic notch and our dials, and it's starting to shape up pretty nicely. So let's use the scroll wheel. Let's press down on it to pan around here. Okay, so let's now add in some round elements that are going to just kind of curve around. So let's type Shift A, curve, and we'll do circle. And we'll click 2D, and that'll fill the circle in. Type S, move your cursor in, left click to confirm. And we'll add a new material and make this a shadeless material as well, and we'll make this a shadeless bright greenish blue, and we will add in a screw modifier. So let's just click add modifier and screw, and we'll change the stance value to 85 so we get a nice smooth radial effect. And now what the screw modifier will do is we'll sort of screw the object around its origin. So what we'll do is we'll move this circle away from the origin a little bit, and we'll see what that radial screw does. So let's type tab and move this up here. And go left click, and we have a nice complete circle there. But if we reduce the angle value, you can see we've got that rounded in there. And we can actually animate that value later on in this tutorial, and that'll give it a nice sort of really techy animation. So let's scale this down a little bit. Left click and let's tab to exit edit mode, and we'll Shift D this, right click to cancel movement, go to the material section, and we'll actually name this, let's see, round element. And we'll click plus to separate the material. Type S and scale that in, and left click. We'll make this thinner, so type tab, type S and scale that down, and left click, and type tab to exit edit mode. And we'll make this more bluish blue. Alright, so we have, let's see, we have two radial elements here of these rounded ones. We've got some nice notches. Let's add in some other effects. So let's add in a plane. So let's Shift A, mesh, plane. And what we'll do is we'll go into edit mode by typing tab, and we'll go into edge selection mode, and we'll right click on this edge, type X, and click vertices to delete the vertices. And we'll type tab on our keyboard to go back into object mode. And we'll type Shift Control Alt and then C, and we'll do geometry to origin. So we're going to use the screw modifier again, and we're going to just screw one side all the way around, kind of like a clock wipe. So what we'll do is we'll cut this in half. So let's type tab and A, make sure that's all selected, and we can type W, click subdivide, and with one cut that should slice it in half. We can select this edge, type X, and click edges to delete that edge. So now we have this radius here. So what we'll do is click on the vertex selection tool, right click this vertex, and just move it away from the center on the x-axis. And now once we add a screw modifier, we can click add modifier screw. You can see if we adjust the angle, it screws around there. So let's change the stance value to 85 to smooth that out, and go back to edge selection, right click on this and move that in. Alright, and go back to vertex selection, and we can move that vertex out. Alright, and type tab. And what we can do now is we can change the angle to 85. So now we have one dial there. So we'll Shift D to duplicate our element, type S and scale it in. So left click to confirm that, what we'll do now is we will duplicate this until we get about 4 of these shapes. So let's type tab to go in edit mode, go into the edge selection tool, right click on this edge, and we'll shift D to duplicate it, right click to cancel the movement. And what we'll do is we'll set the pivot point to the 3D cursor. So whenever we rotate it, so we're going to be rotating it on the Z axis, it'll rotate like so around the cursor. So we'll type RZ45. Let's see. Let's right click to cancel that. We'll do RZ90. Enter. And Shift D, RZ90. Enter. And Shift D. Right click, RZ90. Enter. And type tab to exit edit mode. And you can see now if we adjust the screw value, it'll screw all of those onto each other because we duplicated them around the origin. Alright, so we've got this cool element here. Let's add a material for it. So click new to add a new material. Let's make it a shadeless material. And let's type tab to go into edit mode. Well, let's actually type tab to exit edit mode. Shift D to duplicate this. Right click to cancel the movement. Type S, scale that up, and left click. And type tab to go into edit mode, and let's go to vertex selection mode, and let's see. Let's go tab back into object mode. Alright, this looks pretty good so far. What we can do is go into the modifier section and add in a cast modifier, and we can easily thin or thicken our object like this. So, want some thinner lines there. Alright, that's looking pretty good. And we'll take this, we'll right click on this radial element, so G, make sure you've got this one selected. And we'll type Shift D, right click, and we'll type RZ90, enter. And let's make the angle for this 75. So right click on this one as well and make it 75. And we'll right click here, Shift D, RZ90, enter, Shift D, right click, and RZ90, enter. So now we've got a couple more elements there. Alright, so we're going to shape this up, make it look a little bit more techy. So what we'll do is right click on this right here. We'll type Shift D, duplicate it, right click to move that in, and type GY. Left click to confirm that. And we'll type Shift D again, right click, and we'll type GY. Let's see, move this out here. And left click. We're just going to try and create a nice detailed HUD. So let's right click on this element here one more time, type Shift D to duplicate it, right click to cancel the movement, and GY to move it in, like so. And left click to confirm that. And we will reduce the count to 100. And we'll type SX until we get more of a square shape. Left click to confirm that. And we'll type S and scale it down. Let's see, till we get a nice dotted effect, like so. Left click to confirm that, and we will add in another array modifier. And instead of using relative, we'll use constant offset again, but this time we'll make it offset on the Z, so we can make it sort of pop out into 3D space. And we'll put the count up to 5. Alright. So this is starting to shape up fairly nicely. Let's add in a couple more elements and then get into the compositor. So let's right click on this element here and give it a new material. We'll actually make the material a shadeless red material just to give some contrasting colors in our HUD. And we'll type Shift D, right click to cancel that movement, and type RZ180 so we can totally flip that around there, and type enter. Use the middle mouse button to pan around, and this is starting to shape up fairly good. one thing we can do is we can take this red element, we can add in a cast modifier, thin it up a bit, and we'll right click on this one, hold down shift, right click on this element, type Control L, and click modifiers to link the modifiers. So now hold down shift D, right click to cancel movement, type S, left click, and shift D, right click to cancel movement, type S, and left click there. And we're getting some nice details. So it looks like we're pretty much done here. So we can actually, before we jump into the compositor, we can add in a detailed background as well. So let's see, let's type numpad 0 to go back into top view so you can see your HUD element. And one thing you want to do is once you're done creating all these elements, you're going to want to parent them to an empty. So let's shift A, empty plain axis, and that's just going to make it easier to control your objects in the future. So we'll call this empty HUD parent, left click to confirm that, and we'll type B to box select everything, and left click and hold and just drag a box over all of that, and type Control P and click object keep transformed, and we'll actually Control G to group this, and we'll name this HUD group so that you can select the entire HUD elements group there in the future. So let's left click to confirm that. And with our HUD parent selected, you want to go into the empty settings and you want to change the empty size to be a little bit bigger so you can easily grab these handles whenever you want to select it. So let's see what the parent empty does. So let's right click on this empty, and if you type R twice to rotate it, you can see it'll rotate all of our elements without us having to select them. And that is really nice for creating a HUD element for you to track to some footage or to just plainly animate. So let's right click to cancel the movement to get out of there. And now let's add in that detailed background. So the first thing you want to do is set up your layers before we get into that. So go into the render layer settings, double click on the render layer's name, and we'll name this the HUD layer, and select the first layer tab, and that'll just make sure that the HUD layer is your first layer tab. So let's click plus, click the second layer tab because this will be your second layer, double click back on this, and the second layer will be our background layer. So let's name it appropriately and type enter to confirm it. Now we have our layer set up, so our HUD layer is going to stay on this layer, and our background layer is going to be on the next layer over. But before we create the background layer elements, we will change the shading from sky to transparent so that we get a transparent background with our render. And we'll click the second layer tab and get started on creating our background. So we're going to create a small grid with some circles in between. So we'll type Shift A, and we'll click Mesh, and we'll click Plane. We'll size the plane up by typing S and moving the cursor out, and left click. And we'll type Tab, and we'll type W. We're going to cut the plane up into a lot of tiny squares to make our grid. So we're going to put the number of cuts up to 35. And that should do for now. And what we'll do next is we will add a modifier, a wireframe modifier to this. So we'll type tab to exit edit mode, add in a wireframe modifier, reduce the thickness, and we will go into the material section, add a new material, and we'll make the material a shadeless material. And we'll go back into the modifier section and reduce the thickness. And we'll type Shift A, and we'll click, let's see, curve circle. And now that we have that circle added, let's go into the curve object data tab and change the shape to 2D. And we'll go into the material section, add a new material, and make this circle emit by 1. We'll size it down really small as well. So type S to move your cursor in and left click. So we have our grid here. What we want to do is sort of duplicate our circle lots of times in between the grid object. So what we'll do, so right click on our grid object, go into the object settings and change the name to grid object. And we'll shift D to duplicate it, right click to cancel the movement and name it circle parent. So this is the object that's going to have the circles duplicated across it. So we're going to go into the modifier section and delete the wireframe modifier. And we'll select visible layers in the outliner so we only see the objects for the layer that we're on. And you see we have our objects here. We have the Bezier circle, the circle parent. So we're going to rename the circle grid dots. Alright. So what we're going to do now is we're going to parent our circle parent to the grid dots, and then we're going to use dupliverts to duplicate the dots between the vertices of the circle parent object. So with our grid dots selected, we want to hold down Shift and left click on the circle parent object and type Control P and click Object. And now if we split the screen and go into the outliner, we're going to set up dupliverts here. So go into the outliner and go to Data Blocks, Objects, and here we go. We have our circle parent. Scroll down, and until you see Dupli-type, see, here we go. You want to select the box by it and just select verts from the menu. And now you can see we got our dots duplicated over. So let's go into the materials settings and actually click plus on this material. Check transparency and put the alpha all the way down so that you can see your grid dots. That looks pretty good. One thing you can do is you can actually make the dots more subtle by sizing them down. So you want to click the plus here by circle parent so you can see your grid dots object. Then you want to select your grid dots object and scale your grid dots down. I'm not click to confirm that. You can actually right click on our grid object and reduce the thickness as well. Alright, so 0.0005 should do. Alright, so now let's hold down Shift and select our first layer to see how this looks. So you can see we have a really nice techie looking background. So, middle mouse button to move that around. You can actually right click on our empty and just pull it up so that our HUD object is just above the grid. And that's looking pretty good. One thing we can do is we can add a whole bunch of tech elements in the background and blur them up in the compositor. So type numpad 0 to go back into camera view, and we're gonna add in another layer. So just click this plus to click this tab here, and then go into the render layers and click the plus. Double click on that, and our third layer will be, let's see, tech particles. Let's name it tech particles. Take that S there. Okay, so click the third layer tab, and we're gonna shape in our background elements. So let's type Shift A, mesh, and plane. So let's add a new material for this, and let's name it tech particle. And let's make this a shapeless material with a little bit of transparency, and we'll make it blue. Alright, so let's type SY, scale that down, left click to confirm, and we'll type tab, we'll type Control R to make a loop cut, left click, and just move the cut to the side here, left click to confirm that. We'll go into edge selection mode, right click this edge right here to the top left, type E, right click to cancel movement, and pull it up. So now we created like sort of a folder. So type tab to exit text edit mode. You can type Shift D, move it to the side, and left click. We'll click this plus to make sure this material is separate, and we'll make this a more greenish blue. And type tab. We go into edit mode to alter the shape a little bit, And we can change the pivot point now to median point. And pull this vertex out here. And now we have sort of a slanted folder there. So type tab. Alright, Shift D to duplicate this. I'll click to confirm that. And we're adding a wireframe modifier so we can see the outline of the folder. And looks pretty good. So we can type Shift D to duplicate that. Left click from the movement. And just apply this modifier. Type tab. And we're going to go into edge selection mode. Type B to box select. Box select these edges. Type X. And click edges to delete. And type tab. So now we just have a folder outline there. So we can get rid of that one here. Move it off to the side. And right click on this folder here. Click this plus here. And we're going to, let's see, we're going to make it brighter. And we're going to make it more bluish. We're going to type B and box select over all of these and create a particle group. So we're going to name this Tech Particle Group and type enter. Alright, so we're going to type G and move this off here to the side and left click from that. And what we'll do is we're going to create a lot of particles and sort of give them the illusion of depth. And to do that, we're going to add in a plane and we're going to displace it on the Z axis. So it's just going to have different vertices at different points. And each of these points is going to emit a couple of particles. So it's going to look like you've got particles coming here and here and here. And it's just going to give like a sort of particle field. So we're going to add in that plane. So Shift S, cursor to center, to make sure your cursor is centered. Go back into camera view by typing numpad 0 and type Shift A, mesh plane, and size this up. Left click to confirm that movement, and we're going to type new to add a new material. And we're going to just make it emit by 1. And we're going to go into the modifier section and add a displacement modifier and click new. Go into the texture settings and make it a clouds texture. And what we want to do is cut up our plane a couple of times. So we'll do tab W subdivide. We'll actually do 35 subdivisions again and type tab to exit text edit mode. If you use your middle mouse button to pan around, you can see we have those different points on the Z axis. Now we're going to add in a particle system. So go into the particle system and add a new particle system, and we're going to, let's see, we're going to make it emit at the same point in time. We're going to give it a really high lifetime. Make sure the emitter geometry has no velocity so that our particles aren't just coming out. And lastly but not leastly, we're going to turn off gravity so they don't fall off the screen. Now we're going to select the group that we created for our particles. So we named it Tech Particle Group. So click the group tab, select Tech Particle Group from your drop down, check rotation, put the size up, and random size is good for the whole depth illusion. And uncheck emitter so it doesn't render the emitter regardless of whether our material has transparency or not, which we're going to give it in the viewport. So we're going to go into the material settings, check transparency, and put the alpha down to 0. You can see we got a nice particle field. You can move it lower on the screen here. And hold on Shift and select the second layer here. And just size it up. Type S and scale it up. And left click. So middle mouse button to pan around. You just want to make sure that none of the particles are like going above the grid. Alright. And tighten numpad 0 to go back into camera view. Hold on Shift and select the first layer tab. And you can see we have a very nice scene here. So if we go to the render layer section, we have our tech particles, we have our background layer, and we have our HUD layer. And now what we can do is, let's see, let's render this out. So type F in F12 if you're on a laptop, or just F12, or just click render image up there. And we're going to have to jump into the compositor to combine these elements in our scene. So jump into the compositor, check use nodes, backdrop, and we're going to add a viewer node. So click add output viewer. And we're going to click add color alpha over and hook it after our original render layers node, and hook the output to the viewer. We're going to left click on this HUD layer and shift D to duplicate that and change it to the background layer. See there. I'm going to type shift D, duplicate this, and shift D to duplicate that as well. And we're going to change the background layer to the text particles and put this here. So basically, whatever is in the bottom input of the alpha over node is going to be overlaid over what's on the top input. So we want to make sure that our original HUD layer is in the bottom input there. And we want the grid to be over the text particles. So we've done that by placing this in the bottom input and placing our text particles in the top input. Now if we uncheck use alpha, we'll get a black background to our scene. We get a better look at how it rendered. Alright, so we can add some glow later. We'll go back into default view and actually animate the camera. So go back into default view, go back into 3D view, and you still have your particle object selected, which is let's see, plane.017. You want to go to the cache and you want to bake the particles so that they always behave properly. And before we do anything more intensive, let's save our blend file. So HUD tutorial version 3 is what I'll save it as, and save the blender file. Alright, so let's animate the camera. So if we switch this to AV sync, make the frame rate 60 frames per second so we get some nice smooth animation here. Let's see. Let's use our cursor actually to pan around here. And let's select a nice view for the HUD. So we're just scrolling with our scroll wheel and using the middle mouse button to pan around. We can type Control Alt Numpad 0. Alright, and let's type GY. Let's see. Let's make sure our camera's selected and type GY. Left click and GZ. Left click and just move it until you get a nice zoomed out version of the HUD. So just move along the axes here until you get a nice camera view, and we'll type I, location rotation, and we can rewind to the first frame of our scene, and we can do Shift F to turn on Blender's fly cam. We can just use W, A, S, and D to move that around. And left click and type I, location rotation. And if you fast forward this, it'll just have a nice camera animation if you go through the animation. And you can change that at any point if you like, change your camera's animation, but for now this is pretty adequate. So we can hold down F12 again to render that scene out. So we have our nice HUD and our background elements. Let's go back into 3D view. Let's actually Shift A to add a plane. Size it up. Left click to confirm that. Move the plane just below the grid. Go into the material settings and add a new material, and we'll make it a semi-transparent material. Press 0 to go back into camera view, and that looks pretty good. So we have something covering our HUD up a bit. I mean our text particles. So let's F in and F12 this. All right. So one thing we're about to add some glow. So what we want to do is go back into the 3D view, and we want to actually move this to the second layer. So we don't want we don't want our transparent plane to glow, so we just have it in the second layer. So render that again, and now we can add those fun glow effects. So go into the compositor. Let's add filter glare, hook that up to the original render layers node, which this is not, so we're just gonna plug that back there. and make sure that we have the fog glow hooked to our HUD layer. Always pay attention to what you're hooking these things to. So change the quality to high, threshold to 0, and you can duplicate it over again if you like a stronger glow. And wait for it to composite, and now we've got that nice stronger glow. One thing we can do is we can kind of unify the colors in our scene. So we got this white grid here, but we can make it bluish. So let's go back into default view, 3D view, and select the second layer tab, select the grid dots, and just make them blue, and hold down shift. Let's see, no, let's let go of shift and select the circle parent. See. Let's go for the grid object, hold down shift and select grid dots, type Control L, click materials, and that'll link the material so that whenever we change the material of one, both are changed because they share a material. Let's hold down shift and select the other layer here, and the third layer, tech particles. Let's right click on this actually, and we'll name the material outer HUD. And we'll make this red, or we'll make it a light blue. Alright, and we'll hold down F12 to render that. And again, we can keep adjusting these colors later on in the it's starting to look a lot better now. Alright, so one thing we want to do is we want to give some nice depth of field effects with our background layer and particles. So we're gonna go into the compositor, and we're gonna click add. Let's see, add color mix. What we'll do is we'll mix our original scene with a more scaled up blurry version of it, and we'll use an ellipse mask to mix it with that scaled up version. So let's hook our nodes here. So we have our alpha over node to the mix node. And let's add in a distort scaling node, and we'll hook this. Let's see, let's hook this one here and change the scaling to 1.2, and just type Control S, save it before it gets a little bit more intensive. And we'll need to add an ellipse mask to mix this all, so we'll have to click add matte ellipse mask, put that here, and hook it to the factor of the mix node. And you can see we got this little box here. That's the ellipse mask, and we really want it to encompass our image. So let's put the height and the width up. Let's put the width down just a little bit. Leave the height where it is. And we should get to see our ellipse mask in action. So let's switch the inputs here so that the outer version of our image is what's scaled up. Alright, so you can see we have our hard edge kind of mixing it, and we want it to be blurry, so it's kind of more polished. So let's add a blur and hook it up after our ellipse mask and make sure that's hooked up to the factor, and change it to a fast Gaussian blur, and we'll put the value up to, let's see, we'll do 150 for now, but if you're gonna render for full resolution, you'll want to multiply these values by 2. So let's wait for the blur to composite, and you can see we got a more polished mixing between our scenes, and starting to look pretty nice. What we'll do now is Shift D to duplicate that blur node and hook it up there, and we'll put the blur down to 35. So you want to hook it up after the scaling node and the top input of your mix node, because we're going to blur out the more scaled version of it to give it sort of the illusion of depth of field, and you can see that effect here, and it looks really nice. And if you hook this to the composite node to make sure that composites, we are pretty much finished with the compositing phase of our scene, and we can now go on to the fun part, which is animating this little HUD here. Now I'll just show you some basic tips and tricks for animating the HUD. You can polish it up once you're finish adding the basic layout. So let's go to viewer node. You can see we've got some nice depth of field. We've got a cool looking HUD. And it's pretty much time for animation. So let's go into 3D view and select the first layer tab because that's where all our HUD elements are. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to animate some blinking. So to do that, I'm actually going to check transparency here. Hover your cursor over this value and type I. We're going to go into the modifier section, the graph modifiers, or the graph editor, and we'll pull this out here. Click this arrow and select the alpha, and that's what we just inserted a keyframe for. Type in to bring up the side panel menu, and now we can go into the graph modifiers, and we will add in a noise modifier and scale this up. So let's put the strength up. Let's pull this out so you can see what exactly I'm adjusting. So this is the strength of the modifier. So if you rewind this and play it through, you can see there's some blinking going on in the viewport. You can scale it along so that the blinking is a little bit more pronounced. You can also restrict the frame range. So like you can set it to start and end at a certain frame. So let's put the start frame at 12, end frame at 190. So it starts blinking around there. Hit pause, rewind. So we got a blinking HUD now. We got a blinking HUD element. Hold on shift and use the mouse button to move that around. Alright, so let's do the same thing with some of our other elements, except let's right click on this, check transparency, let's make it pulse. So hover your cursor over the alpha and type I. And let's add in a noise modifier for the alpha. And we'll put the strength up as well as the scaling, but we'll put the scaling out further so we get more of a pulsing. Alright, let's put the strength down a little bit. Alright, so maybe put the strength up and the scaling out. So let's also high. Alright, so we'll put the scaling down so we get it a little bit more frequent. Alright, put the strength down a little bit as well. Alright, so this is starting to shape up a little bit better. It's being a little bit more pulsy. You can change the phase value as well. Alright, and let's see, reduce the strength. Pull the scaling down a little bit. Alright, and you can just keep adjusting these values. Until you get a nice preferable effect. Just put the scaling down a little bit more. Put the strength down a little bit more. And you can just keep adjusting these values. But for now, let's leave that as is. Alright. Now let's take a look at what else we can animate. Let's right click on this element here, the one that comes out on the Z axis to give that depth. So you can type G to make sure you have the right thing selected. And right click to cancel the movement. You can actually go into the modifier section, scroll down, and insert a keyframe on the count. So if we add a modifier noise for that as well, and put the strength up a little higher, you can see we have sort of blinking going on there. So it's just going to randomly change the value through the noise modifier. It's just going to be blinking like so. We can restrict the frame range to 190, make it start at frame 12. So end frame 190, start frame 12. We rewind. So that's looking pretty nice. You can right click on this as well, go into the material settings, and we can check transparency, insert a keyframe for that, and select the alpha and add the modifier, put the strength up, rewind, play it. So you can see we got some blinking going on there. Let's put the scale up. So this is only if you really want all of your or most of your HUD objects to blink. I think I'm going to actually get rid of the noise modifier for this. So we'll have some of our elements blink and some of them won't. We'll just have it rotate randomly. So let's type I, and let's actually click location for this, since it uses basically the curve that it's curved to change its view rotation. What we'll do is add in a modifier for the X location and make it a noise modifier. So let's see. And you can see it randomly rotates like that, but we want the strength up and the scaling out so that we get long rotations. So let's put the strength even further up, play it, and put the scaling up. And we really want to tweak this a lot. So let's put the scaling up to 300 or 3000. And you can really just keep tweaking the different parameters of the effect. Hit pause on that. Actually, what we can do, let's see, is we can pretty much delete this noise modifier. What we'll do is, as far as the location, we have one keyframe inserted for it already. So let's pull this up and go into the dope sheet. Click this cursor here, see what that keyframe is. So let's see, frame 62. Alright, so frame 62 to, let's say, frame 150. Let's type GX. Move it out for a little bit and left click. And we'll actually lock the alpha channel so that we're not affecting the animation for that. We'll do channel extrapolation mode, linear extrapolation, so we get constant rotation. But we want to make sure we do that on our X location. So you do channel extrapolation mode, linear extrapolation. Move this through. Let's see. Let's make sure we've inserted that second keyframe for the location. So let's frame 150. Looks like it didn't set, so let's just GX. Move it off a little bit. Left click I, location. Alright, so might have forgot to insert that keyframe. But you want to make sure it's inserted. Channel extrapolation mode, linear extrapolation. And you get that constant rotation. So, alright. So you can again keep tweaking this. One thing we're going to want to do though is hit pause. So right click on this element right here. We're gonna have it sort of come in with a nice screw modifier effect. So let's have a cursor over the angle value and type I for frame 64, and let's make the value really low. Like we'll do 0. Have a cursor over that and type I. Alt A and play this through. You can see it blinks and comes in. And let's see, we'll have our cursor over this and type I. Type home so we get zoomed more in on these keyframes here in the dope sheet. And just right click on this keyframe and move it out further and left click. Alright, so now we get more of a smooth way it comes in. We can rotate this as well. So bring this about here and type I and click rotation. So frame 82, insert a keyframe for rotation. And now let's see, if we type RZ and move our cursor this way, alright, that should do. So let's right click and cancel that. And rewind RZ and move our cursor this way just a little bit. Left click and type I rotation. So we get the rotation as well as the screw effect, and it makes it look a lot more polished. So we've got that center element rotating and screwing in, and we've got pretty much everything else blinking. Let's see, right click on this, and what we'll do now, let's see, we'll make this kind of focus. So let's right click on this, type oops, let's Control Z that. I accidentally typed H, and that'll hide your element from the scene. If you rewind G, let's see, GY, let's see, it's actually just scale this up. Yeah, scaling will work for this element. So let's fast forward here, type I. So insert a keyframe for the scaling on frame 53. And let's see. We'll type S, move our cursor out, left click on frame 26 and type I scaling. And rewind back here and type this, type S and move that cursor in, and just left click to confirm that and type I and click scaling. And that'll just give your HUD a nice focusing effect. And before it settles there, we'll type I and click scaling here and move this keyframe out further. Rewind, type Alt A. So it's just kind of settling in there and it looks a lot more polished. So before we finish up here, let's right click on this. And what we want to do is we want our HUD to kind of settle on this side as well. So type I, click scaling on frame 72, rewind, and let's see, on frame 36, we'll size this up, S, move the cursor out, and left click to confirm that, and type I and click scaling. Let's rewind this, and we're going to size it down completely on frame 10. So S, 0, enter on frame 10, and type I and click scaling, and just play this through, and you have the HUD scaling up, focusing down. Let's go to frame, let's see, any frame before the finish here, just before this keyframe. Type I, click scaling, and let's pull out the last keyframe a little bit later. So right click, drag that, and left click, rewind, and type Alt A, and you can play that and see it's settled. So select your other layers while holding Shift and selecting them. Go into Numpad, go into Camera View. So we've got a couple of our HUD elements animated, and you can actually add a couple more animations to this, but it's looking pretty much nice enough to render now. So we're gonna hit pause. We're gonna set up our render settings. 100%. Make sure you got that MPEG. Set your encoding presets. Actually, you just want to choose any format that's compatible with whatever media player you use. We use MPEG-4 most of the time, but you can use AVI, H.264, whatever works with your media player. So just setting it to MPEG-4, setting the minimum and maximum values to 14,000. You can also render this out as an image sequence, but if you have audio that you include in the video sequence editor, you might want to just render it straight to a video using these settings. So 100% resolution, choose your output, make sure you choose an actual folder on your computer besides your temporary folder. We'll just go for desktop, HUD result, click accept, and we can go back into the compositor, re-render our scene, and we're gonna have to adjust some settings now. So type Control S to save this. While it's rendering, just wait a little bit. 100% resolution takes a little bit longer than 50% resolution to render. Use your scroll wheel to pan around here. Move the blur node around here. Actually, just gonna organize the node setup while this is taking its time to render. Alright, now you can type V here to zoom out here, so you can adjust your blur values and such. But this is looking pretty good. One more thing we're going to do before we finish up with the tutorial is we're going to add in a cinematic sort of vignette. So let's type Shift D on this mix node here, change it to a multiply node. So we're gonna make the edges of our scene kind of just fade in. So we're gonna duplicate this blurred ellipse mask setup here. Just hold down Shift and just select them both. Hook that to the bottom input, leave the value to multiply, and you can put the factor down on the multiply node to just reduce the strength, and then you just wait for it to composite and you should see your nice edge fade. So we're just going to wait for this to composite, and once it's done compositing, you want to make sure that you hook the last node in your node setup to the composite node. And now you can see that edge fade. So if we switch it to viewer node down here, you can see it a little bit better, and it just adds a lot of polish to your scene. So you can play around with the colors as well as the modifiers used to animate the scene. So if you want, you can always make sure to do this. Is make sure to hook the new multiply node or the last node in your node setup to the composite node. So we're pretty much finished with this tutorial, and if you're interested in some more cool Blender motion graphics projects, you can check out our Polygon titles pack in the description of this video or in the card that should pop up here. Hope you all enjoyed the video, and if you did, leave a thumbs up below, maybe comment too. Check out our shop for some epic Blender kits, and totally check out the links in the description if you like these tutorials. Subscribe for more, and we'll see you guys in the next tutorial.